So psychiatric survivors need to learn how to talk to lawyers, and lawyers need to learn how to talk to psychiatric survivors. And this is not medical advice, and this is not legal advice. I've talked with and communicated with probably thousands of psychiatric survivors over the last 10, 15 years. And I have a master's degree in psychology, and I can be decent at professional communication when I want to be. And I've heard from lawyers say that courts are stacked against and biased against, and arguably ableist or sanist against, people in the psychiatric survivor movement. Psychiatric survivor movement. And that's unfortunate. So what I'll say will hopefully be helpful to a lawyer or psychiatric survivor to hopefully understand the other. People who have been abused by psychiatric systems are often in a great deal of distress. They often may have trouble articulating how they've been harmed or what injustice has happened to them. And partially this is due to some of the, I will call it, institutional gaslighting within psychiatry. Both lawyers and psychiatric survivors, many of them, not all of them, have been inundated with psychiatric propaganda. Now, for lawyers, I'd recommend you listen to the audiobooks by psychiatrist Thomas Szasz. Szasz is S-Z-A-S-Z. Now, perhaps lawyers seem biased against psychiatric survivors because the laws are biased against psychiatric survivors. So, regardless, laws can change. Laws do change. The courts will rule laws as unconstitutional sometimes. So at one point I was talking more actively with a psychiatric survivor buddy who had family who knew a good deal about law. And his theory was that lawsuits should go through diversity court. And my general understanding of diversity court is it means diversity in the sense of a variety of things can go through it. Jurisdictions may be different. I'm not sure for sure. I'm not a lawyer. So I guess my coaching thoughts to other people in the psychiatric survivor movement would be, if you try to contact lawyers, try to be articulate. Try to manage your emotions as best you can so you communicate clearly, so you communicate succinctly. So what you are saying is not so vague or so amorphous that lawyers aren't sure how to respond. My general understanding is that many psychiatric injustices go unaddressed. Justice is not served. So in theory, there should be many potential legal cases that lawyers can profit from and help people. Again, this is not legal advice, this is my general understanding and my own opinions and views. And now I think part of the problem is that, judges are likely biased against mental patients. Many jurors are likely biased against mental patients. So part of the issue is the whole issue of the idea of mental illness, that we believe in mental illness, that we believe in psychiatry is an objective medical specialty. And then because mental illnesses are real, then people with mental illnesses have, less moral capacity, less agency. And therefore this lends to the idea that just like Black people used to have chattel slavery inflicted on them, and there were many different justifications used for the chattel slavery being inflicted on them. Currently, there are many analogous, although different, justifications for psychiatric slavery, for psychiatric human rights abuses, for psychiatric constitutional rights violations, for psychiatric civil rights violations being perpetrated against people categorized as mental patients. So what needs to change? I think lawyers can hopefully challenge the idea of mental illness and psychiatry as a valid medical specialty. Lawyers can do this in their own minds, philosophically, ethically, so on and so forth. This can result in different approaches in how they talk with potential clients, legal clients, and how they think about and conceptualize legal cases and potential, claims of constitutional rights violations or civil rights violations or lack of informed consent. And at the same time, I think it will benefit psychiatric survivors and people in the CSX movement, consumer survivor and ex-mental patient movement, if they can figure out how to better articulate, whether in writing or speaking, and perhaps they can use AI to do so, to help them summarize, to help them clarify what they're trying to say, to help them figure out how to say it in ways that lawyers will be able to do something with it as far as a clear claim, a clear rationale for the claim, so on and so forth. And again, this is not legal advice. This is coming from somebody who, you know, yeah, uh, if nothing else, because of child psychiatry, will say, I would identify as part of the CSX movement. For example, psychologist Bonnie Burstow wrote a paper called something to the effect of child psychiatric drugging as a form of child abuse, not a radical proposition. So psychiatrist Thomas Saz made a similar claim that simply children cannot consent to psychiatric services, just like they cannot consent to intimate relations. And therefore, child psychiatric drugging is a form of an outrageous violation, an assault on the child, effectively, according to psychiatrist Thomas Saz. And Bonnie Burstow seems to make a similar argument. So, alternatives to child psychiatric drugging are talking, boundaries, appropriate and legal, discipline of the children that is not abusive, opposed to, diagnosing a 6-year-old bipolar disorder and giving the 6-year-old mood stabilizers that can have, cause, metabolic problems and health problems that last potentially decades or the rest of their life for some. That's my understanding. To the best of my knowledge, there's some pretty messed up psychiatric drug side effects. If a child gets put on an antipsychotic drug and becomes obese and then, has metabolic problems for the rest of their life, there's all sorts of bad things. Also PSSD, post SSRI sexual dysfunction can affect teens and then into their adulthood. At least I've heard adults claim that, that is their lived experience. So, hopefully psychiatry will be exposed for what it is. I'm not a Scientologist, although with regards to psychiatry, I'm a lowercase Scientologist, at least with respect to agreeing with them on how to view psychiatry. So I'll end it there. Maybe I'll make more videos on this, but this will be a start, I guess. So I guess in summary, lawyers, I hope, will challenge the idea of mental illness as a form of actual medical disease, will understand the metaphorical nature of mental illness and mental health, will study the history of psychiatry, will be patient and listen, and perhaps try to help coach people in the psychiatric survivor movement on how to talk with them as far as what information they need, how they need it, whether they publish this on their website or so on and so forth. Some may already do this. Again, I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice, but regardless, it seems, from what I can tell, based on the grassroots psychiatric survivor movement, many psychiatric human and civil rights abuses go unaddressed from a, redress of grievances, justice perspective. And psychiatric survivors, perhaps need to try and figure out ways to articulate the injustices that happen against them in a more clear way, in a more succinct way, in a calmer, more measured way. If you're talking with a lawyer or a legal assistant and they're wanting, short, quick, efficient answers, but when they ask a question, you give them a 2 to 5 minute, answer that goes off on a tangent, they might think that you're pretty hard to work with, or that they're not going to be able to build a case with you. And again, that's just one potential situation. Probably doesn't apply to everybody, but in general, again, the other problem is the fact that the legal system may be stacked against people in this, who are psychiatric survivors, and that's a whole other issue, which again, lawyers can't help address through, uh, court cases that result in precedent or laws overturned, or perhaps precedent with regards to how certain constitutional rights should be respected. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but I definitely see a problem in our legal system. And based on discussions with psychiatric survivors over the last, decade and a half, it seems many, many, many injustices go unaddressed. And having talked with a variety of lawyers, some of whom have even said that the courts are biased against, people who are in the psychiatric survivor movement, or people who've experienced psychiatry, something needs to change. So this is just my own opinion, general philosophical suggestions. If you have ideas of what can change, make a video, write a book, write an article, make a comment. So anyway, I'll end it there. Thanks for watching. Limitless Peace.